Okay, you guys, this book, My Gunkle and Me, when this children's book came across my desk, it literally healed a younger part of me. When I was growing up, I had an uncle who was gay, and I had another uncle who was very much opposed to that and was really honestly cruel in how I was introduced to my uncle's sexuality. And so when I saw this, I felt it just by the title of the book, and I ordered it as soon as it was available. I think I pre-ordered it. I'm so excited because the author is here today, one of America's most popular writers on issues of faith and culture. He is the author of several critically acclaimed books. He is an award-winning contributor for The Atlantic. He's published more than 3,000 articles in respected outlets, including the New York Times, USA Today, BuzzFeed, The Washington Post, The Daily Beast, and Christianity Today. He contributes commentary to television, print, and radio news outlets. He has been interviewed by ABC World News, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, NPR, PBS, and CBS, and 60 Minutes. I am delighted. I'm honored. I'm excited that I get to sit today with Christianity's gay best friend, Jonathan Merritt.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to the Work of Warriors. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, I know you're so busy, so it means a lot to me that you would take this time.
Gosh,
It really does.
It is my pleasure.
It's probably going to be my favorite part of the interview, maybe, but can we just jump in with this?
Oh my gosh, yes.
My Gunkle and Me.
Oh my gosh, yes, that book, the book of my heart.
Well, I've been following you for quite some time, and I love your work. I have my own share of like church wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love your work because you feel like a very safe corner of the internet and of social media. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks.
But when I saw the title and I saw you start promoting it, it just honestly healed a little younger version of me. I'm a little emotional. It's very special to me because I have an uncle who's gay.
Oh.
And when I was little, he was my favorite. I mean, not that he still isn't, but he was my favorite uncle of 4. And my Uncle Tim, and I was a little bit like Henry in the book, but my Uncle Tim was so special to me. He just was always so kind and so fun and so generous. And then I have this trauma around another uncle sharing my Uncle Tim's sexuality with me, and the way that he did it and the way that he said it was very cruel.
Oh.
It was so unkind. It was so tainted. And then, my version of the story is that then my Uncle Tim moved away and he moved to California. We were in Illinois. And so when I saw that, I'm like, I think I messaged you and I'm like, I really could have used this when I was 6.
Wow.
So on behalf of all of us who share a commonality in this realm, I just want to say thank you.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. I never set out to write children's books. I've always written for grown-ups, and the majority of my career, I was like a columnist who was writing about politics and, contentious grown-up issues. And, you can never, the spirit blows wherever it will. And the spirit of creativity blew into my life in the form of this story of Henry and his gunkle, and it was mined from the soil of my own life. And it was the kind of book I wish I would have had when I was a kid as well. But it's also reflective of the ways in which my own life story has become more beautiful in adulthood. And so to reflect that back was a real gift. But man, I did not expect to ever write an illustrated children's book. But it's been such a joyful experience because of talking to people like you and a lot of people I hear from. They either now have maybe a gay sibling who's actively in the life of their children. And so this book becomes a tool to have conversations that need to be had. You had a conversation that was not a great conversation. And in some ways, those conversations were had because the better version of that conversation, parents and adults didn't feel equipped to have those conversations. And so what I hope to do with this book is to give people, give parents in particular, the type of tool that they would need to have that conversation in a good way, in a loving way, in a redemptive way, before somebody comes along and has it in a negative way. And so
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to say more about what your experience was?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the home of a Southern Baptist preacher, a megachurch pastor, a TV preacher. My dad was president of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Christian body outside of the Roman Catholic Church in the United States. Southern Baptist Church doesn't have very many good things to say about people who are gay, if it acknowledges them at all as even
Right.
existing. For a lot of Southern Baptist people, there's no such thing as a gay person. There's just straight people who are denying their own straightness. And so I grew up hearing terrible things about people who were like me. And as I came to kind of understand who I was, I thought, oh gosh, all those terrible things that were said about those people now apply to me, because I think I might be one of those people in some way. I've long understood that the futures that we create are a function of the types of imaginations we have as children, shaped by the stories we're told. And I was told stories about gay people dying in the fire and going to the fires of hell, of gay
And how
people
old were
being,
you?
oh, I mean, these are stories for all ages if you're raised evangelical. So, we're talking as early as my earliest memories. Um,
Wow.
and as bad a job as religion did in telling me stories about what happened to people who had the courage to embrace their identity as gay and queer people, secular culture didn't do a very good job either. I came of age in the 1990s, in the heights of the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s and early 90s. And so, if you saw gay people depicted on the news, on television, these were not positive pictures. They were people with heroin needles in their arms and people lying comatose in gutters and dying alone in hospital beds. And so I thought surely nothing good would be in store for a person like me if I ever had enough courage to step out of the closet.
Mm.
And I wanted to write um, the kind of story that would give children a more positive imagination, not just for being a gay, but for being different in any way. This is not one of those books that's trying to tell kids they're gay.
Right.
And not that those books exist.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but this is a book that simply is a story that takes place in the kind of world that so many children live in, a world where gay people do exist and are a part of our families. And it tells a true story, which is a story that acknowledges that there are gifts to give, that queer people have gifts to give, that other people don't have to give, that are mined from the soil of their unique life experiences. And so I hope that when people read this book, that children will realize that whatever it is that makes them different makes them special, and that's the gift they have to give to the world.
So again, thank you because, having the experience that I had with, one contentious uncle against my favorite uncle was so confusing. And I think I was 6. And
Yeah.
so it was so jolting. And again, for any differences, to have somebody talk so negatively about somebody that you love and you're a child, it's hard
Yeah.
enough as an adult to hear it. But when you're a child, it's just devastating. And I I think, if I'm correct, I think my uncle Tim, who was my favorite uncle, was not allowed to babysit me
Yeah.
because he was gay.
Wow.
And there was
Yeah.
never an ounce of harm. And in fact, I think it probably caused him more harm, as just as a human being, just being viewed that way. With all of your experiences within the way that you were raised and being in the church, how would you describe that impacted your mental health?
Oh gosh. Well, I suppose there were some positives. Um, I think that there are some ways in which, statistically speaking, religion can be a real benefit. It gives you a set of tools that you can use you can deploy and that promote health. Um, that that's more true when you are white, male, and straight. And if you deviate from those categories and you're raised in a fundamentalist home, or you're just somebody who's really, really curious or doubting. If you're not a loyal soldier, or you don't fit into the majoritarian categories of identity, then it gets really hard. You begin to learn early on that in fundamentalism, and this is very similar to what you learned from your other uncle, not your gay uncle. What you learned was not just something negative about being gay, but you learned something negative about the way love works. That you are not loved as completely or as fully, that your access and your privileges are cut off if you do not conform to a certain way of being. And so there's a conditionality to love, and that has a very negative impact on mental well-being, because it compromises your sense of security, your sense of safety, your sense of belonging. I mean, these are like really high on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, especially for a child. And I think similarly, there was a study that was done by Baylor University not too long ago that was saying it kind of had your God concept was placed into 4 quadrants, right? So there's like the God that's mostly angry but mostly distant, the God that's mostly angry but mostly involved, the God that's mostly loving but is distant, and the God that's loving and involved. And those concepts of God um, correlate to mental health in some really profound ways. So I grew up with an angry, involved God, which is one of the worst God concepts that a person can have. Has the most negative impacts on your mental health. And I've since made the transition to a loving God who's also involved, which has the most positive fruit in terms of mental health and mental well-being. But the God that you encounter in your formative years, there's a kind of residue that's left behind, and you never fully deprogram from those sort of the encoded software of that previous version. So there's this, like, even though I know on a conscious level that what we call God is a loving entity and is for us and with us and is present in this experience we're having in this life, there's still that voice that sort of whispers in the background, and just as soon as you think that you've shaken it off and you've left it behind, there it is again, creeping up on you, whispering in your ear, what if they're right? What if this is not the truth? What if you have denied the truth or walked away from the truth? What if And so there's also, when you grow up with a negative God concept and you transition to a positive concept, you're also committing to a lifetime of work of deprogramming and reprogramming, which means you don't have as many reserves as you'd have otherwise mentally, because you're having to constantly do this other work just to reach a level of stability. And
Can you
that's
say more
deeply
about that?
unfortunate.
Can you describe that a little bit more about what that work looks like to maintain that stability?
Yeah, so if you become an observer of your own thoughts and your own anxieties, you're holding yourself accountable for the ways in which you are thinking about God, which is just another way of saying the ways in which we're thinking about capital R reality, the thing beneath the thing. I mean, what could be more consequential than one's God concept? When you're having to monitor that, and you I'm constantly having to say, no, that's not right. No. And then you've got to say, well, what's not right? Oh, there that goes again. And well, what is true? And then you have to kind of work it in, right? Like continue to fold in what you believe is true, over and against the lies that you were told growing up. It's exhausting work. And that's just to get back to that sort of default level where most people live who never encountered the God that I inherited.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just means that the available energy I have to promote my own mental well-being is limited by the energy I have to invest to keep me from falling off the cliff into the place of despair that is the natural fruit of the God concept I inherited. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but that's
Yeah,
that sort
well,
of
and
is
yeah, and it's
the
exhausting.
way in which
Yeah,
I think about all the energy that I have to invest just to survive.
sure. Yeah. And like you said, it's exhausting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And people, I would say people who are parts of any, you know, if somebody on this podcast were a Black person or a trans person or a woman in a patriarchal community, they would say could say a similar thing about their own existence, that they're having to
Mm-hmm.
deprogram from when they were most formative, when your
Mm-hmm.
brain is so soft and your nerve pathways are being formed, the things that you're being told by your authority figures, the people that you love and trust, that's becoming, deeply imprinted into your psyche. And the rest of your life is spent having to undo those lies and then replace it with the truth. And it's like whack-a-mole. As soon as you think you're done, you're not done.
That's how I feel about the healing journey in general as humans. But more specifically to what you're talking about, that was what I was going to ask you is what would you say is the truth? If I'm raised with, one set of beliefs and it was during my formative years and I'm like, I don't know what the truth is. What would you
Mhm.
say?
Well, I can only say what my experience and my faith tells me when we're talking about spirituality, and that is that God is love. And that, even if you're somebody who is a very rigid Christian, who's even a literalist in terms of how you read your holy scriptures, that's one thing that I think we can all say that's a pretty good starting point we can all agree on. And so if God is love, then the ways in which God thinks about us and interacts with us, and the ways in which God wills for us, have to be consistent with the loving nature of who God is. And people will then, what ends up happening in fundamentalism is fundamentalism will then have to redefine basic terms in order to get its God concept to fit. So they'll describe something that any child will tell you is unloving, but then they'll call it love. So you'll have a
Mm,
parent who kicks their child out of their home because they're gay, for example. So you have a gay youth who are in homeless shelters, and they are told that that's what love does, right? So there's this kind of
mm,
like gaslighting about basic concepts of human existence, such as love. And so I know I have to even return to what I know love is and what love does and what love looks like, and say, God is love. That is what God does. That is who God is. God loves you because God loves you because God loves you, that God has no wrath or anger or punishment for you, that God is not like your abusive parent. God is the perfect parent, the all loving parent, um, and that God has nothing but good things for you. And for some folks, in certain religious traditions, that is an intolerable thing to believe, because it
mm,
removes your ability to create um, borders, insiders and outsiders, hierarchy of power, marginalization. It doesn't allow you to other others. And so we have to create these workarounds that makes the loving God so unloving. And I start with that and say, I believe that is true. And when you open your heart to love, you begin to experience the love of God in such a way that it becomes undeniable.
mm. It's so beautiful. What has been a positive experience in regards to like what you're describing now?
Mhm.
Do you have an experience that you'd be willing to share that's just one of those life altering moments in a good way?
Hmm. Well, I think that when you've encountered a bad version of a good thing, so
Mm,
spirituality is a good thing. And religion is just a container into which spirituality can exist so that it gives it form and shape. I encountered a bad version of that. A version of that. Now, it wasn't all bad, right? Fundamentalism has you can always tease out and say, what are the gifts and what are the liabilities or the risks? What's the shadow side and the light? There was light in in the tradition I was raised in, but there was a lot of shadow, and a lot of that shadow was concentrated in responses to people like me. So when you've encountered a bad version of a good thing, a lot of people will say, I no longer trust the thing. So they go, yeah, people who grew up in fundamentalism, they don't walk away from fundamentalism. They walk away from religion. They walk away from spirituality. They are triggered by the symbols, the stories, the language, the whole
mm,
thing. They become so afraid of being re-traumatized by the bad version of the good thing that they just decide to stay away from the thing altogether. And I have to say, I don't I don't fault people for that. I totally understand that response.
mm,
For me, faith or spirituality is, I often say there are things in life that you run toward, and there are things in life that you can't seem to run away from. And for me, religion or spirituality is the second thing. It's the thing that I can't seem to run away from it. Because it's so foundational to the way that I experience life. And it's a set of tools that can be really, really meaningful and helpful to me.
mhm,
And so, what I have done, and it's been helpful, is to find an expression of spirituality that is life giving and healthy. that makes space for people like me, that reaffirms what I know to be true about the unflappable love of God. And so my church and my Christian community that I'm a part of now uh, in New York has not only been a positive presence, but it's been a healing presence. Because
Mhm.
when you encounter the good version of the good thing, it can help to heal some of the carnage that was created by the bad version of the good thing.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. You're doing a lot of brave work.
Mm.
You've done a lot of courageous work. You've done 3,000 articles. You've really been courageous and honest and authentic in sharing your experience and what you know to be true. I would assume you get additional backlash?
Mhm. Yeah, these days I write a lot fewer articles than I used to. And the reason is because the internet has changed and
Yeah.
it's not a safe place like it used to be. Maybe it was
Yeah.
never as safe as we thought, but it certainly is less safe than it used to be. And it's become more toxic and more combative. And so I think when I first started out as a columnist, it was an emotionally positive experience. It was almost cathartic because it was the first time I could write in a way that I felt like was true. I could say the things I believed were true about God, about faith, about spirituality, even if those true things were negative truths about the way that I had been brought up or the way that that tradition was expressing itself today. Um, Over time, I think the math shifted. So some of that work, that positive emotional impact from writing those articles was undone by the backlash that I would receive online after the publication of an article like that. And
Mhm.
um and it wasn't just backlash against me. Um to this day, there will be comments on my dad's social media, unrelated to anything he's saying or doing, that sort of is attempting to bully him using me, or maybe to bully
Mhm.
me through him. And that takes a toll. So I
Yeah.
have had other family members who've been attacked by people who don't like me, and then we'll call them out and I mean, I remember when we talked about My Gunkle and Me, my children's book, and my dad remains evangelical, though we love each other and we've remained in relationship. We actually have a great relationship. So, is that the book my dad would have chosen for me to write? Probably not. But he loves me and he allows me to live the life that I've chosen for myself. So, that for some people is offensive in and of itself. And so people were trying to bully him into attacking me and condemning my children's book. And it was brutal, you know,
I can imagine.
emails and tweets and just, you know, the number of people that we have both had to just mute for our own sanities. So at some point, you start to think, I've said a lot of the things that I needed to say about X, Y, and Z. And of course now these days, everybody can have a platform to say anything. When I first started this work, it wasn't that way. Like being a journalist was a real amplifier. And now, there are people who, they get more clicks than the New York Times on their Instagram page. So, um, there are a lot of voices doing that work, and I'm not so egotistical into thinking I'm the only one and I have to pick every fight. I have to take up every cause. So I would say some of my work has actually been, I think some of my early work in the first half of life was about, what do I need to say that I'm not
Mm.
saying? How can I speak up to say the thing that I've been silenced from saying for too long? And I think now, as I'm entering the second half of life, a lot of my work is around where I need not to say. That actually the best thing for me is to rest in the knowledge of what I know to be true and allow someone else to fight certain fights. And there's a
Mm.
wisdom in silence, just like there's a wisdom in speaking up, and there's a discernment to know the difference. And I think that's been my work in this period of life. And I'll say, if I had continued to write, 3 columns a week, which is what I was doing at one.
Oh, I lost your volume.
If can you hear me now?
There you are.
I don't know
Yeah.
why it went red. If I had continued to write 3 columns a week and manage the backlash and response and fight with all of the haters and trolls, I don't think that I would have had the energy to write my children's book. So when I say no to using my energy in a way that I know is not good or beneficial or healthy, then I create margin where my creativity still flows, but it flows out in other ways. And I think that we have to fight the darkness, and somebody has to do that. And also, we have to champion the light. And I think in my first half of life, I was a darkness fighter, and that was so meaningful to me. And the more that I'm discerning my own calling and vocation in this season of life, it is to go and to be the light and to allow someone else to do some of the darkness fighting in my stead.
Mm. I love that you're speaking to how we can do different things in different seasons of life, and how you apply that to, spirituality and, even your vocation. Um, I'm curious what your current church
Mhm.
looks like. Like, if I were a fly on the wall, um, what does your current church and Christian community look like?
Yeah. Well, I'll say 2 things, depending on how you mean that. So there's the church in the traditional sense, and then there's the church maybe in a more non-traditional sense. I think if church is creating a space where you commune with God, a space that is uniquely sacred, where you create space where God can act, then I think church is an experience that I have been able to nurture in lots of different places and with lots of
Mhm.
different people.
Mhm.
And that has been an amazing experience. And a lot of people have had that experience. But there's also a real value, I think, in church in the traditional sense, the organized or established church. There are lots of gifts in that way of being religious or faithful. And so I go to a church in New York City. We meet in Manhattan, called Good Shepherd. And we would never use this language to describe ourselves, but we're a kind of post evangelical congregation. We would say We are an interdenominational ecumenical church. And by that, we mean that whatever tradition you come from, we want you to bring the gifts of that tradition into our community for the sake of all. And that there's something that we can learn both from the pain and the joy that you bring. And so that's new. It's new for me to be in a church that welcomes all of you in your religious tradition as we walk the way of Jesus together. That rather than say, this particular way of being Christian is the way, and we're going to put our our stamp of authorization on that. That's the authorized way of being Christian for our church. And then anybody who deviates from that maybe feels less welcome, or maybe they are less welcome. We hold together the tension of a multifaceted community with lots of different ways of being Christian, recognizing that every way of being Christian has its own set of gifts and wisdom, sacred wisdom, and that we can learn from each other if we will welcome it all to the table. The other thing that I think our church does really well is, I would describe us as not a belief-based church, but a practice-based church. So we are a diverse group of believers who are together practicing the way of Jesus. And we have a practice of reciting the creed. So if you come to our church, we would say the Apostles' Creed, which is the earliest compression of basic Christian belief. But we say that even when we say the Apostles' Creed, it's we believe, we as a community. And there may be some parts of that you don't know if you believe it right now. That's okay. We say it together. In some cases, it's a statement of faith or hope or of holding up one another. We have a practice of prayer. We have a practice of gathering. We have a practice of the table. We take Eucharist every week, which is something that Christians have done for a long, long time. We have a practice of reading the scripture together and reflecting on the Gospels. We have a practice of silence. We hold silence together. So when people say to us, well, what does your church believe about? And, fill in the blank with whatever your favorite theological debate is. We would say, I don't know. Why don't you go ask them? Because we are a people who are working out all of those things together alongside the Spirit. And our church doesn't use a certain set of Christian beliefs as measuring sticks of someone's spiritual stature or their commitment to following Jesus. And, I get that wouldn't work for a lot of churches, depending on how that church came to be, but it works really, really well for ours. And I know it because I look around that room and I see people coming back to life who maybe haven't experienced life in a religious setting for a really, really long time.
Yeah. Well, that would be my experience.
Mm.
So I was baptized Catholic, like as an infant,
Oh, wow.
because that's what you did.
Yeah.
And my joke is always like, I think I was baptized and then I was taken to the babysitter so all the family could go to the bar and celebrate. And so it wasn't a really meaningful experience necessarily. And then I found my way into a mega church, and it was the beginning of, my husband and I's relationship, and it was very meaningful and powerful and life-changing. And then it was a mega church that, you're surely familiar with in the Chicagoland area.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of trauma coming out of that. And, I don't think I've stepped foot other than a graduation since. And however, in my day to day, like even today, I had like a group coaching call with my coach, and it was so spiritual and it was so insightful and so enlightening. In my head, I was just like, this is church. Maybe we didn't call it that. And maybe that wasn't the intention we had coming in, but we are a collective of love and connection. And so I really appreciate you sharing all of that. I would love to visit sometime.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we would love to have you. It would be a gift to have you among us. We have some folks in our community from Chicago,
Yeah.
who I think maybe even were part of that community too. And there's so much healing that happens in it. We're not a perfect church, but we're just what some of us need, and we'd love to have you. That'd be fantastic. I mean, a lot of people, we have a thing called digital church, which is our digital expression, and it's not like a live stream. It's like a separately made expression of our Sunday gathering.
Mm.
And it is so soulful and artistic and beautiful that we've had people now who consider themselves a part of Good Shepherd who live in Nashville or Washington
Mm.
State. And that's really beautiful too. In fact, those people who are part of the kind of far-flung Good Shepherd communities, will even come and hang out with us, and it's so beautiful because they will say to us, it's not that I'm choosing you over another church. I'm choosing you over no church
Mm.
because there isn't a church, in my proximity that I would feel comfortable attending. But I love being able to attend your church digitally. And, they've formed neighbors have come together with neighbors as a part of digital church. And, that was not even the kind of thing that I believed was possible or good. And now I see the way that in our current moment, the way that that's a life draft for a lot of people is meaningful digital connection with a new way of or a different way of being Christian.
Sure. Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you because I think now in where our world is, where our culture is right now, where our society is, you wrote the 5 guidelines to maintain relationships despite disagreement.
Uh-huh.
And that was really powerful. And I was wondering if you could just quickly share what those are, because I think now is a time where we need that probably more than ever.
Yeah, so this was actually born out of my relationship with my dad and really trying to navigate what it would look like to stay in relationship with someone who had beliefs, and not just generic beliefs. I mean, we disagree on politics and theology about as much as any two people can, but even beliefs about my own identity, um, that are deeply at odds. And in our current moment, the way to respond to that is to cut that person off.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole cottage industry of influencers out there who are encouraging people to go no contact with their immediate family. And, I'll be the first to admit that there are times where a family or a family member is abusive to the point that the only right response is distance, separation, or even lack of communication, total severing of relationship. But I think that that's true mostly in extreme cases. A lot of what we know about the ways in which our primary relationships are embedded into our beings, and the ways in which our relationships with our parents are not like our relationships with our coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a coworker who believes some of the things that some of my primary family members believe, I'm probably not going to be investing in that relationship. But it's different when it is the person who gave you life, the person who was with you every year of your formative years. And so I've worked hard to stay in relationship, but that relationship often looks smaller than I wish it would.
Mm-hmm.
That's just sort of the way that it works, right? You're not going to have your dream relationship with that person, perhaps, but you can have something that's not nothing. You can have something that can be in its own way really beautiful, and the energy that you save from trying to force this to be something it's not, you can invest into finding people who can fill in the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote this post, 5 guidelines to maintain a relationship despite disagreement. And they were to remember that you can't police someone else's beliefs about you, but you can police someone's behaviors toward you. This was a big one for me, which is, look, if you think I'm a bad person, I what I can do is I can try to convince you I'm a good person. I can argue with you, but anyone who can argue you into thinking I'm a good person, somebody else can argue you out of that belief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is not within my control to manage your mind. I cannot dictate what you believe about the world or me with precision, right? I can influence it. I can be a good person and hope that you come to believe that I'm a good person. But we've all had experiences with people that we've treated very well who've thought very terrible things about us.
Mm-hmm.
So I cannot manage your mind, your beliefs, but I can manage your behaviors. And that works both ways, right? I can say, here's how I need to be treated, however you think about me. Going back to my example of church, we don't have a statement of belief about LGBTQ identity or marriage. So can you be a part of Good Shepherd and believe that gay Christians shouldn't be married? The answer is yes, you can. You can. But the way that we maintain a sense of safety is we have a practice of inclusion. So if you're going to hold that belief, you still have to practice inclusion, which means you have to serve next to me and pray next to me. And sometimes I might sing or preach, and you get to sing and preach too. How about that? But we're not going to say things that other or offend, that makes somebody feel less than a fully accepted child of God, that we practice inclusion together, whatever your beliefs are. And in the same way, in my family unit, we have a practice around accepting each other. And so, that
Wow.
can be really, really, really difficult. But I'll give you a great example. One of the ways that we police each other's behaviors is we only use language to describe the other person in conversation in the way that they would describe themselves. So my dad doesn't call me same-sex attracted, although the phrase same-sex attracted may actually be more aligned with his own beliefs, but that's not how I would describe myself. So you can call me gay, a gay man, or a queer man, or a queer person, whatever works for you, because that's how I would describe me. And out of
Mm-hmm.
your love for me and respect for me, you can describe me, speak of me the way I would speak of myself. Well, the shoe, fits both feet, and I don't describe my dad as a fundamentalist. You know, do I think that he fits that definition? I do. Is that more aligned with what I believe to be true? It is. But he finds that term offensive, and he wouldn't describe himself that way. He describes himself as an evangelical Christian, an evangelical Protestant, a Southern Baptist. And so when I'm speaking of him, to him, I'm not using inflammatory identifiers, and neither is he. Now, he can't change the fact that I think he fits that definition, and I can't change the fact that he would use different language for me. We're not policing each other's beliefs. We're exerting control only where control is possible. So that's one. And I spend a little time there just because it's so important. The other one
It's so
is
important.
so
It's so
important.
powerful.
The second one is that it's okay to fight with each other in private but you only fight for each other in public. And this makes a lot of people mad
Mm.
because there's a, the social media can become like the new Roman Colosseum, where people really love to see two people pitted against each other and fighting to the death. And if you refuse to give the crowds what they want, the mobs can come for you. They can get really frustrated or angry. They can try to goad you into it or bribe you into it. And we just simply refuse to play that game. So just because we're kind to each other and loving to each other and affirming of each other on social media doesn't mean that we don't have deep disagreements. We absolutely do. But those disagreements are held in private. And by the way, once disagreements are externalized in public, they become much harder to resolve. They become very complicated. The stakes get unbelievably high. And
Mhm.
so we stay far, far away from public arguments, despite the fact that lots of people try to get us to fight with each other. Now, we will joke
Wow.
that if you were to, if you were to put ring cameras all over our house when I'm home to visit, you might see some disagreements and arguments. But we have those in safe places. And by the way, I'll add one more little note here that may be helpful for people. We also intentionally do not recruit other family members in our private disputes. My dad won't be like, well, I told your mother what you said and she agrees with me. Or I won't say, my brother James, says that he thinks you're wrong on this too, because that just widens the rifts and the divisions. So we don't recruit other family members in our disagreements either. The third is, and this maybe even relates back to some of the other things that we've been talking about, is that we always keep in mind that it is hard to truly love someone when all of your energy is devoted to trying to change who they are. So most of us have a choice. Do you want to love me or do you want to change me? Because they become at some point mutually exclusive. And if you want to change me, then what you call love could be bribery or coercion. It could be energy that is misdirected and called love. It's not the energy of acceptance, which is the heart of love. So I think that that a lot of people get this. A lot of my friends who are in the LGBTQ community, they get this when it comes to who they are.
Mhm.
And they forget this truth when it comes to who other people are. So I think that relationships, all to thrive, you have to come to each other on equal terms. So if I want my dad to stop trying to change who I am and just love me as I am, then I have to do the same thing. Isn't that a shame? I have to give up all of my desires to change who he is and to become the person I want him to be and to love him as he is, imperfect as that is, instead. And that's a tall order. That's a difficult order. A lot of folks become fundamentalists in the opposite direction, right? Where they go, I used to think I was right and you were wrong. Now I think I'm right and you were wrong. It's just a different you. And I use the same tools against you that I learned so well in fundamentalism, even though I let go of all the fundamentalist theology and politics and beliefs and ideologies. And I think we have to let go of our efforts to coerce someone else to form them into the image that we wish they were. The other thing is there's a real spirit of curiosity in our relationship, and that has been intentional, and we've had to fight for it. So during heated discussions, really during any discussions, we really try to get curious. You know, it's a principle from Saint Francis. Seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. And I think what happens, at least in my experiences, is in relationship, we often assume that we know people better than we really do, and that they know us less well than they might. And so we go, yeah, you don't understand me, but I understand you. I know who you are, but you don't know
Right.
me. And so that assumption then creates an energy that becomes argumentative, persuasive, coercive. So instead, what if you were to replace that energy of coercion with an energy of curiosity? What would that do if you were to soften the edges of that coercive energy and to allow it to transform into curiosity? And you were to say, "Oh man, I don't like that you're saying that, and I don't agree with it, but I'd like to know more about how you came to believe that was true.
Hmm.
I'd like to understand when you see the way that that impacts me. I would think that that would make you feel this way, but instead it makes you feel that way. Can you explain that to me? I'd like to understand that better." Um, that to me is an energy that almost counterintuitively, that's an energy that can lead to change. It's disarming, right? It gets the other party out of a defensive position. So even though you're not trying to change, oftentimes we find that we do try to change. You know, there's a difference between a goal and a result. When change no longer is the goal, change often becomes the result. Isn't that weird the way that works? You often
Hmm.
by not trying to get that thing, you end up with that thing. That's the miracle of it all. So we make sure that that more statements end in a question mark than an exclamation point. And then the fifth one is, and this is just kind of overarching for friends and family members, is never forget that the people who will cry at your funeral matter more than the people who populate your social media feeds. And that's a big one, because
Amen.
you know these days it's like someone shows up in your Facebook feed. They don't know you. They didn't give birth to you. They didn't go to college with you. They've never cried with you. They don't know your middle name. They don't know what you prefer for breakfast. And yet we will be encouraged to act in ways that they would like us to act simply because they have a voice in a forum, over and against the people who do know us, who have walked with us. You know, the one thing you can't make in life, as they say, is old friends. And sometimes we throw away old friends at the advice of strangers. And I think that's generally a bad practice. So I make sure that the voices that I'm valuing are the voices that I know are committed to walking this earth with me. And
Mm.
again, this is not saying, you know, there's the old way of saying like family matters most and stick with the family and protect the family and, you know, everyone else be damned. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that your family always gets a pass, or somebody simply because somebody is invested in your life that they get a get out of jail free card, or you can excuse their bad behavior, or they shouldn't be held to account for the ways in which they're creating harm. I'm not saying those things at all. Actually, because you love them, because you want to continue to walk this journey with them, you do want to invest the energy, the hard work that is required to protect yourself, to make sure that the relationship that you have isn't perpetuating harm. But what I think we want to be really, really careful with is that we're not valuing the opinions of people who don't have our best interest in mind, have not invested in us in any real and tangible way. And in a digital age, I think it's far too easy to overvalue the voices that are not there to really carry us through the difficult moments in life.
I'm so glad you said that. It's so much of the premise of the work that I do as a coach, right? Working with artists and entrepreneurs and entertainers, we're literally telling an entire group of people that that's what the goal is. And I'm over here like, no, 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 no. You will lose yourself and you will hurt yourself and you'll hurt other people, right? And so, and also my concern is we're raising a generation of youth to believe that their worth or their value is in the social media and the likes and going viral and all these things. And there's so many people who have gone viral who it hurt them more than it
Right.
helped them, and it wasn't what they thought it would be. And I see it over and over and over again. And so I'm so glad that you said that. Like, really cultivate the relationships of people who are willing to do this journey with you and not lose your worth to strangers
Yeah.
who in a hot second would ditch you, cancel you, hurt you, lie about you,
Hmm.
move on to the next person, betray you, abandon you. I mean,
That's right.
and so that's why I think it's really important also just to really know who you are and to know your foundation, to have your foundation of your own values
Yeah.
and your own spirituality and your own sense of knowing yourself and the world and what you believe.
Yeah. I totally agree.
It fascinates me to hear you talk about these values, I guess, with your family, of how you interact with each other. We stay curious. We don't elicit other family members. I mean, that's so common. It's so toxic, but it's so common. Did you all have a conversation of like, here are the rules, here's the agreement, how did that how did
No, in
that
fact,
come to be?
I wish we would have. This is what's been emerging over the last 12 years. And I'm sharing it because what I wish had happened
Mm,
is when the whole house came tumbling down and we had to really rebuild it, and I didn't know that it would ever be rebuilt. I wish somebody had said, here's a jump start. Here's a best practices manual. Here's a guide for making it through. And I didn't have that. So, I think
I think we
there
should
are,
print it and digitize it and give it to everyone.
oh my gosh, thank you.
Everyone needs it. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
personally put it in my personal playbook. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably even, there's probably more than 5. There's probably 50, and I should
Sure.
sit down and think about some of those best practices or guidelines. And again, they're best practices to eat the fish and spit out the bones. If you think something doesn't work for you, or if it doesn't promote
Yeah.
your own safety and well-being, then this is not the gospel truth. These are not written in red letters, but they have worked for me. And so
Mm,
I'm sharing them in the hopes that they might be helpful for someone else.
yeah. Thank you. So, are there any other mental health practices that you would offer that you have? Like, are there any non negotiables that you have or things that you do on a regular basis to maintain your mental wellness?
Yes. Well, I'm in the unfortunate situation where I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder, and I have had depressive episodes in my life. And the medicine, I am, as you would call it, treatment resistant. I can take certain medicines, but the most effective medicines I have really bad side effects. So I've tried all the best SSRIs, and the side effects are as bad as the symptoms. So I've had to find non-medicinal ways to cope And, I had somebody today who, one of my best friends, who wrote me and said, "Hey, you've been off Lexapro for so long at this point, and this person is on Lexapro. And what do you do to stay? You feel like it seems like you're doing pretty well. What do you do?" I do a lot of very intentional journaling and processing, a ton. Some mornings I have to do a whole hour. I will wake up and it starts, the anxiety taps me on the shoulder and starts talking, and I'll be on the verge of a panic attack, and I have to I get up, I grab my pen, I grab my notebook, and I start writing. And it began as a practice. I was doing the artist way, and it was a practice of morning pages where you just clear it out. And I'll tell you, even if all you do is morning pages, 3 handwritten, um, free flowing stream of consciousness thoughts the second you wake up, even if you do just that, I'm telling you, it will have a positive effect on your mental well-being. It gets the things that are inside of you have to be moved outside of you so that they are separated from you, that you can evaluate them, that you can judge what is or isn't for you, so that you can look at it. It's a way of realizing that you are not your thoughts. You are not what's coming up. And just telling yourself that doesn't do a lot. You have to embody it. And I embody it by getting those thoughts outside of me. I have a whole series in the back of all my notebooks, and it has changed over time. I've started to realize the lies that come up when I write in stream of consciousness. There's a lot of people are fans these days. A lot of people are fans of internal family systems, right? These that actually, we're not one person, we're a whole bunch of people inside. There's the worrier, and there's the inner critic, and there are all these people inside. The only way that you can kind of begin to unscramble that egg or pull that yarn apart is by externalizing it, externalizing all of that cloud of internal voices. And then you can look at it and go, "Oh, I see you. I know you. I know what I know you're trying to protect me. I know you want to keep me safe. I know you've learned some things that are terribly untrue." And you can begin to hold those parts of you accountable. And you don't do it by stuffing them away or pretending they don't exist. You welcome them to the conversation. And then you
With
also,
curiosity.
with curiosity. And if you make something your enemy, you never get rid of it. If you try to stuff something away, it will be there forever. But if you welcome it as a friend, then you're able to step away from it. And I'm also able then, with a series of affirmations I have, they're sort of custom designed for the lies that those parts of me are speaking in that season of life. And so I do a lot of truth telling to myself, a lot of truth telling. And so, that for me has become a very important practice. I now incorporate prayer into it. So, in addition to the journaling, in addition to the affirmations, I also pray in a dialogical form. I pray and I listen. I pray and I listen. I pray and I listen. And for me, there's no page requirement. I just go until it's done. And I have to say, it is a huge investment. I wish that there were a pill that I could take that would replace that work. Even if I were able to take SSRIs, which, by the way, I used to take those, and they were necessary to get me through. And you know what? I have a bottle of Xanax downstairs if there's an emergency, or I can grab a Klonopin. I've got a Klonopin, and I can go for that. I'm not in any way anti-medicine. But because of the limitations I have, that's been my salvation. What I wish I would have known is I wish it hadn't. I wish even when I were on those medications for all those years, I wish I had been doing this practice anyway, because there's a benefit to this practice, whether you're on medication or not, that it will promote your mental well-being and your mental wellness. So for me, and I'll tell you, when I don't do it, when I skip it, it's like a different person gets out of bed.
Hmm. For me, this time of year, just the season of winter, my non-negotiables have to go from 85% is good to 95% is necessary,
Yeah.
just to make sure. I so relate to the anxiety. I can literally wake up terrified.
Hmm.
Like before I open my eyes, all of a sudden I'm
Oh,
just
yeah.
terrified. And there's no logic to it. But
Uh-huh.
getting curious and
Hmm.
for me, I have to get to the gym too, but getting
Mhm.
in the journal,
Yeah.
I will ask you, I mean, I feel like I could ask you anything, but in your journaling every day, sometimes an hour, how much of that would you say is spent in grief or tears? Because I feel like people don't understand that grief is part of the healing process. And so I'm curious what your
Yeah.
perspective is on that.
So, a few years ago, I added to my regiment, not just my therapist, but I added a spiritual director.
Mm.
And my spiritual director would start by saying, "How's God showing up in your life right now?" And it would allow me to think about, if I would say it in one word, how's God coming to me in this season? And there are times where God was coming to me in provision. I could just see God making provision for me, or abundance. There were times where God came in gratitude. There was a period, a long period, where God was coming in my grief. And for me, it's seasonal. It's in different movements throughout the year. I'm not in a
Mm.
grief season right now, but I would just weep every time I mean, it was like the first word would start and tears would start flowing and flowing and flowing. And even in the day, if I were to talk about the thing that came up in the journal, I would start to cry. And my spiritual director is a Jesuit priest, and he said that Ignatius used to speak about the gift of tears, that it was actually a special gift that God would give to us in seasons, where
Mm.
tears would be the way that we would encounter the divine and that we would experience divine healing. Um, I find that when I'm in seasons of grief, my grief is so big that it overtakes everything else. It's the only thing almost that I can do. Sometimes grief will break through in small ways in other seasons. Could be in a season of deep gratitude, and grief will break through. But for me, the way that I experience grief, it comes in waves, where it is, when it knocks on my door, it's like it walks out and clears the room,
Hmm.
and we have time together, just us. And that's how it is until grief decides to go home. So for me, it has come often. And when it does, it's very intense and acute. And I do some real deep grieving. And I'm not somebody who, I didn't grow up really being, I wasn't like, crying was a sign of weakness. And I hate crying, and I hated crying. But now I'm somebody who can cry quite easily. And I don't like to do it in front of people, still, but I found it to be an incredibly cathartic tool in my time of journaling. But that's not the season that I'm in right now.
Sure. Sure. Well, I appreciate you sharing that because I feel like for many people who might, whether they're wrestling with life or mental health or trauma, it's grief can be such a scary piece of it. And
Yeah.
so I feel like the way you just described it is really human and normalizing.
Yeah.
and validating.
When I'll tell you one thing that really one season, when I was working on my Guncle and Me, my children's book, you know, people when they first get that book, they go, "Oh, we get it. You're the Guncle." And I
Mm.
even kind of look like the Guncle, I mean, my wonderful illustrator, Joanna Carrillo, she's such a genius. She's illustrated a lot of beautiful books and she did such a good job. And she did sort of, the Guncle sort of looks like me, which is so fun and interesting and playful. Um, it wasn't until I got the book in the mail and opened it for the first time and I realized I'm Henry. Uh, it's like I was writing a book from my current self to my past self. It was like in that book, it was like my present day self knelt down on the ground and looked my boy self, my childhood self in the eyes and told him what he needed to hear and said to him what he didn't hear but needed. And I started to just weep. And for me, that was such a season. Like I think as a practice, if you want to do a real deep practice that will kind of lead you into grief work, you can do it with visualizing your childhood self as your present day self and saying what that childhood self needs to hear. Even my therapist and I, we've done things before where she'll say, I remember saying, well, I feel like I'm so mad that I wasted my 20s. Should be one of the, your 20s should be, I'm now 42. Your 20s should be, one of the best decades of your life. And I wasted it living in the back of an evangelical closet. And she was able to say, I'd love for you to leave. We were on Zoom. I'd love for you to step out. And when you come back, I'd like to talk to 18-year-old Jonathan. So I come back and she says, 18-year-old Jonathan, I was just talking, to 41 at this time, 41-year-old Jonathan. And here's what he said. He said, you should have done this and you should have done that. And why didn't you do this? And then I was able to explain, I have no resources. And my whole life is, and I'm so afraid, and I'm explaining this. And then she says, thank you for sharing. Could you step out? I'd like to talk to 41-year-old Jonathan. And so I
Mm.
would step out of the frame and I would come back and she would say, Jonathan, I just had a conversation with 18-year-old Jonathan. And here's what he said about what you said. And I began to have these compassionate, grief-filled conversations with previous versions of myself. And they were unbelievably liberating. All of the anger that I had, all of the misunderstanding, all of the animosity that I had, all of the regret that I was living with was then able to, through the portal of grief, melt away. And so grief can be, I think, an incredible tool when it is employed in bringing together different versions of yourself to have conversations that are overdue.
I love that type of somatic work, where you really dive into what's happening with your body
Mm.
and what version of you is coming forward. And, you can even connect that with IFS therapy and, the whole premise of there are no bad parts.
Mm-hmm.
And there are younger versions of ourselves. Again, a huge piece of my coaching, but there's younger versions that are saying, hey, I'm still here. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't really resolve that. And I would like
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, and they're still alive. I remember one of my literary heroes is Barbara Brown Taylor, and I got to meet her for the first time years ago. We were teaching at a writing conference together, and I asked her a question. I said, I have all of your old sermons and all of your old, 20, 30 years ago, the things that you taught, and I wonder how you think about those things today, because they're so unlike the Barbara Brown Taylor I know now. And she said, well, I just think that all of us, we're like rings in a tree. And that was Barbara Brown Taylor, and that is Barbara Brown Taylor. And for me, it was so eye-opening to realize that the previous versions of ourselves still live inside us and that they can be
Absolutely.
accessed. And a lot of the data shows neurologically that when we encounter those parts of ourselves and we reignite those neural pathways, that the brain almost experiences it as if you're back in that moment in the past, and you can do a lot of healing, present healing of
Mm-hmm.
past events. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
amazing? Isn't that an amazing
It's so
feature of our
amazing.
design?
It's so powerful.
So I found that to be one of the keys that has opened up the lockbox that holds the healing inside for me.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
Oh yes,
I love the
yeah.
Enneagram.
What type are you?
I'm a 6 with a 7 wing. How about you?
Oh, I am a 3 with a 2 wing.
Okay. All right. So
Yeah.
we're still in the same triad.
Yes. And the
But one of
3
the
will go to
reasons I
6, and the 6 will go to 3 sometimes.
yes.
That's right.
Yeah. So when in my coaching, what I love about it is it can often be somewhat like IFS, a fast track through what's coming forward, right? Because there's different centers of intelligence based on your type. And so where your triggers are, we can go back and we can say, okay, where do you feel that in your body? Okay, in your heart, in your chest. Okay, well, the dominant emotion of the heart center is shame.
Mhm.
And so we're not going to judge the shame. It doesn't mean that you're sitting here feeling embarrassed, but it really opens up this pathway to, okay, and how old do you feel?
Mhm.
And let's get curious. What did life look like when you were that age and you felt this way? And the story always comes forward. And then we get to go back and talk to
Mhm.
that version and repair those neural pathways and rewrite the story and heal. And it's so powerful.
Mhm.
So I love anytime I hear someone talk about that experience and that somatic experience of healing,
Mhm.
because I just can't imagine life without it.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Same.
So, one last question. What would you say to someone who is struggling with their mental health, or where to start, or maybe just like, what's the point? And, this doesn't replace mental health care. But for those of us who've been there, what would you say to somebody, in a few words?
Mm. Well, I think that the healing journey, one of the reasons that we don't want to start oftentimes is because it feels so big. It's like, how am I going to get from here to there? And of course, as the old saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Well,
Yeah.
where do you begin? Well, the one other part you have to remember is this is a road that is best walked in company of others. And so what I would say is to begin to assemble the team of people who will walk with you on this journey, who are the safe people that you can invite in, and simply admit you're not committing to anything, but simply admit a curiosity. Maybe the curiosity has become a desire. Maybe the desire has become an intention. So giving yourself the resources you need, the communal resources you need, for me, I think is a great first step, because every time when I look back at my own healing journey, every time I've taken another step, not every time, but oftentimes it was because someone who I loved and who loved me, someone who I trusted, who trusts me, um, got curious with me about a potential next step. and then encouraged me to take it. I went to see after I was very painfully outed 12 years ago, and I had a friend of mine in Colorado who said, um, there's a therapist out here who works with people in intensives where you come out for several weeks and you spend 3 hours a day. And um, what would it look like? Would you be interested in that? And I said, I think I would. What if I gave you my car so you could drive out there? And what if my friend let you stay in their house? They just live down the road. And what if, and that was the beginning. In 2019, when my life really had fallen apart, I'd just given out. I was having a breakdown. I had a friend who said to me, I hear there's this place in Tennessee called Onsite, and you can go and do a week there where you give up your phone and you do this really interesting methodology that helps to get to the heart of the trauma that so many of us live with. And I'd be happy to help you make it there. Um, there were people at every step of the way who recommended something or who were simply a listening ear. Even, the artist's way was something that I found through my friends at church. Hey, have you ever thought about trying this? Well, there's a group of people who are going to do it this summer. Why don't you join this group? And that has become the practice that has sustained me through this period. There have been people all along the way, my people, my team of trusted loved ones and confidants who help to guide me. And it's so much easier to walk the road when you're not walking alone. And that for me is a core principle. It's easier to walk the road when you're not walking it alone. So I would just start there. Don't start with a commitment. Don't start with New Year's resolutions or goal setting or anything that feels too big or too far or asks too much of you. Simply begin by putting together your community, the community of people who will walk with you wherever you decide to go, whenever you decide to do it.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for being such a light.
Thank you.
I feel like I've had healing from this conversation.
Oh gosh. Well, the pleasure has been all mine.
I look forward to keeping in touch, and just thanks again.